Welcome. Hello, I'm Stephen Evans, Executive Director of FotoFest, and I want to thank you all for joining us for another in our continuing Creative Conversations digital talks. We're really excited today. We've got a great program. Today, we'll be hearing from artist Rosana Paulino in conversation with Martha Scott Burton, and we'll get to that in just a moment. In 4 weeks' time, on September 12th at 2 p.m., I'll be in conversation with Azu Nwagbogu, curator, writer, organizer, and impresario of and founder of Lagos Photo, and that should be a fascinating conversation. And we'll be talking about his work in museums and with the festival especially. FotoFest wouldn't be able to do these programs without the generous support of our major individual and institutional funders, which include the Brown Foundation, the Houston Endowment, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Texas Commission on the Arts, the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation, the Powell Foundation, the Wortham Foundation, David and Martha Moore, the WWW Foundation, the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, Nina and Michael Zilka, supporters of the FotoFest Annual Fund, and the FotoFest Board of Directors. So we thank them for making these talks possible. All of our talks are archived on our YouTube channel, so I invite you to check that out, and you can find the direct link to that on our FotoFest webpage, www.fotofest.org. Rosana Paulino is a visual artist whose work centers around social, ethnic, and gender issues, focusing in particular on Black women in Brazilian society and the various types of violence suffered by this population due to racism and the lasting legacy of slavery. She holds a doctorate in visual arts from the School of Communication and Arts at the University of Sao Paulo, a specialization in engraving from the London Print Studio, and a bachelor's degree in engraving also from the University of Sao Paulo. She's received fellowships and grants from the Ford Foundation from 2006 to 2008, as well as, and please forgive my Portuguese, as well as the Coordenação de Aperfeiçoamento de Pessoal de Nível Superior from 2008 to 2011. In 2014, she was a recipient of the Rockefeller Foundation Scholarship for residency at the Bellagio Center in Bellagio, Italy. Paulino's works are held by prominent museums such as the Musée d'Arte Moderna in Sao Paulo, the University of New Mexico Art Museum, and the Musée Afro-Brazil in Sao Paulo. In addition to that, she's had exhibitions at the Galleria Superficie in 2016, a space cultural Fort Griffon et Bessindan in 2014, the Musée d'Art Contemporaneo Americana in Sao Paulo, among others. Her work, Das Avós, was recently featured in the FotoFest Biennial 2020. African Cosmologies, Photography, Time and the Other, which was curated by Mark Seeley. And it's been our special pleasure to present Rosana's work. And without further ado, I would like to open it up. We'll begin with both Rosana Paulino and Martha Scott Burton. And thank you again for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. And a big thank you to Stephen, Max, and FotoFest for facilitating our trans-hemispheric digital conversation. Rosana, I'm not sure that I see your video.
Yes, I can't open it. I'm not allowed to open it. The hostess did not allow me to open my video. I don't know why.
Perhaps we could have a host give her screen access.
He,
Here you are.
okay, great.
Right. All right, great.
Great.
So Rosanna, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. I know it's a particularly crazy time with COVID and being under lockdown. So Stephen gave this great introduction for your exhibition history and some issues that you address in your work. And as he mentioned, we will, today we're going to show some clips of Das Avós, the video, your first video work, which was presented in the FotoFest Biennial before lockdown. So I was wondering if we could just, before we screen those clips, if you would be, for the general audience, some of whom may not be familiar with your practice, kind of give a brief overview of what you're working through in your work, in your art.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to say that I am working with fine arts more than 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
During all this time, I'm working with some ideas about Black females in Brazil, the role played by this part of the society in Brazil and the racism and all the marks, all the marks that the racism put on this population in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Can I interject, because I realize I made a big boo-boo and I forgot to introduce Martha Scott properly.
Oh, well.
Well, you mentioned, Rosanna, you mentioned your work about racism. So this is, I think, a good time to talk about it, because that's been a focus of her work. So I apologize for that. I had my bios in opposite order, so I messed up. Martha Scott Burton is an independent scholar and writer whose research focuses on photography, issues and strategies of representation, and the politics of identity in modern and contemporary art. She has held curatorial and research positions at the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Morgan Library and Museum, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and the Studio Museum in Harlem. Her writing appears in Peter Hujar, Speed of Life, Helio Otisica, To Organize Delirium, and Studio, the Studio Museum in Harlem magazine, as well as in College Art Association reviews. Martha Scott recently earned her MA in Art History and a graduate portfolio in Women's and Gender Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. She is currently assisting Dr. Adele Nelson with her forthcoming book, Forming Abstraction, Art and Institutions in Post-War Brazil. And I wanted to do that to give a grounding to your conversation. I apologize again, and I'm going to turn it back to you, Rosanna, to continue to speak about your work in addressing racism.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. I think that it's about racism, and it's about how Black females is facing it, and then how Black females were marked in Brazilian society by the racism. Basically, is this that I'm working, because it's so much material, it's so much things, it's so much things to think about when we consider racism in Brazil, because it is something that we don't see easily at the first glance in Brazil. We have to put some attention. So basically it's this, working with racism in Brazil and working with Black females and a place occupied by this population in the country.
And so in this conversation, we're going to be looking more at your work that involves photographic images. You were trained as a printmaker and work across a wide range of media, including installation, sculpture, printmaking, of course, and a kind of combination thereof. So to me, what we'll be looking at today is really an aspect of your practice, which is the way you are really interrogating photography, the way photography has been a tool for the topics that you just mentioned. And we were going to look at a couple, we're going to start with Das Avós and then sort of backtrack and look through some work from the 2010s. Before I believe Max is going to screen the clips. The video work, which was featured in FotoFest, and hopefully will be back in real life once we're out of lockdown, is over 9 minutes, but we've selected kind of like a beginning and an end just to give a taste. Could you introduce the work, what specifically you were thinking about in making Das Avós, which it translates to the grandmas in English.
Grandmas. I was thinking about ancestrality, and I was thinking that Brazilian people, Black people, we don't know about our past. I was looking for bring the power of that females, that first Black females that arrived in the country, and try to make a link between the past and the present, because I am working with photos and photos from slavery period for a long time. So a lot of times I just had one of that photos on my hands and talk about, oh my God, this woman could be a grandma, maybe, I don't know. Nobody knows. So we have a kind of thread linking the past and the future, but we don't know exactly about the past. So I would like to bring this past, to bring this ancestrality, and make like a circle, because, for example, that grandma is like to become alive again. But the performer, that's her name is Charlene, she lives, she is alive, she's a product of that grandma, maybe. No, one of that woman could be a grandma of Charlene. So Charlene exists because that women. And they come back to life because Charlene is sewing them over her whole body. Her body is like a media, is like a screen while she sealed at the males. So it's like a circle. Charlene does exist because that women came before, and the women come back to life because Charlene is alive.
Great. So Max, with those thoughts in mind, Max, would you be able to screen share the video clips, please? Great. Great, thank you, Max. So I think Rosanna is going to get her video back up.
Yes, I ever have a problem to come back with my video. Let me try again.
Ah,
Okay,
hello.
great.
Rosanna, I love that work. It's so meditative, and there's like this act of caring, and also this sense of like protectiveness that these women and the photographs of these women are being made visible for the performer Charlene. So there was I really feel like this work is a good way to segue into other bodies of work you've made in the last 10 years or so. One of them, for me, it's so much about making like legibility and making this kind of poetics of honoring, and as you've said, like creating this ancestry. So I was just thinking about how this piece in some ways is reminiscent of one of your earliest pieces, The Memory Wall.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to share my screen so we could get some images going. So this is what we've just seen. Oops. So this work, you're using a different set of photographs in Memory Wall, but it is this sort of protective piece in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just illuminate a little bit about this piece, which was, it looks like it was made over 11 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this memory wall, we call that Parede da Memória in Portuguese. It's made by 1,500 pieces.
Mm-hmm.
In these pieces, we have 11 photos from my family. There are only 11 photos, so it works like a giant memory game. But at the same time, I use a shape that's called the patois in Portuguese, a shape that looks like a very small cushion. And inside that, we have in the Afro-Brazilian religions, some things that are intended to protect the owner of this cushion, this small cushion, the owner of this patois. So I put 11 images of my family in this patois, and I multiplied them a lot, thousands, hundreds of times. The idea is to bring this force, this strength together. You can ignore one of this person in the crowd, but you can't ignore 1,500 eyes on you. So it's about community, it's about ancestry, it's about to bring these people with me, because they are my ancestry, it's to, at the same time, it's to protect them, because all of the it was made one by one, sewing. So the process is very important in this work. But at the same time, for example, I have 11 photos there. I have my sisters, my mother, my father, for example. But I myself, I am not on the wall, because that's not necessary. I am there by my DNA. I am there because these people are my ancestors. So I am inside this wall, this enormous panel. At the same time, they are taking care of me, and I am taking care of them, because when I made the sewing and put them inside these small cushions, it's like to protect it. It's like to bring them for another space, a sacred space.
And so we're seeing in this work, as we did in Das Avós, this use of thread. You use a lot of embroidery and sewing techniques in your practice. And so in these two works, we see sewing being a healing way of attaching. It's a very restorative means of connection. I'm struck, you've mentioned in other conversations how you differentiate this sort of healing aspect in sewing, but the way that the thread is used in other works, more like what you call a suture, that they have two, it's the same medium, but a different effect. So I was wondering if you could kind of discuss a bit this distinction you make in your practice between sewing, which we see in Das Avós, and something more like in this work, The Progress of Nations, a more suturing effect.
Yes, in this case, sewing has a completely different meaning for me. In Das Avós and in the memorial wall, for example, I am trying to protect my ancestry. But in this case, like the Progress of Nations, I am using the concept of suture because I am dealing with the idea of Brazilian society. Brazilian society is a very violent society. We suppress the right of the Black people here. We do not discuss this. Black people, enslaved people has until today the worst conditions in the society. And when we fight against this, for example, they send the police against the people. So in this case, when I use a suture, for example, I am thinking how in Brazil the politics, the policy tried to put different parts of the population together in a very violent way. So it's, it's what is a suture? A suture is to put two different parts of the bud of the skin, for example, and I use the strength to put these parts together. And it's the same thing in the Brazilian society. You don't really care about these people. You don't think about their rights. You don't try to find solution to the problem. You just put things together. You just put people together and suppress their rights. And so when we have rebellion, for example, you send the police. So it is very violent. And the suture in this case intended to show this process that came since from the colony in Brazil. So for me, I use the sewing, for example, in different ways. It is very important. For me, sewing is very important. I started sewing when I was a child, for example. I learned to do this when I was a child. So to use these different ways to think about sewing for me, it's important and bring a different meaning for the work.
And I've thought when I look at works like these and see the threads hanging down, I think about, it's just such a violent incorporation of communities, and that if you just pulled the thread, just the whole thing would fall apart. So I wanted to kind of highlight this distinction because I loved what you said about using the same medium but for different ends. I think this is something I'm really invested in your work, is the way that you're using photographs, 19th century photographs that were initially very, they are very violent images and used for really harmful effects. And in this case, you're sort of deploying them towards a more healing and remaking process. So to kind of focus a little bit more on your use of photographic images, as I said, you're not strictly a photographer. You work in a lot of mediums, trained as a printmaker. But the way that you use photographs is just deep interrogation of the historiography of photography and how photographs get used for social control. So you and I have talked about how in the late 2010s, you had a pretty big shift in your practice through coming across this book by George Ermakov, which was published in 2004. So I was wondering if you could just talk about what your reaction was to the book, and then how did the photographs in the book, and how did that affect your practice?
Yes, I found one image in particular in this book in 2010 that really was a turning point in my career. When I saw an image of a Black female that was portrayed in three different positions, front, side, and back, and she was nude. When I saw that, I just thought, oh my God, what is this photo about? What is this image about? So I started to study the scientific racism, that's a pseudoscience, that's not really a science. And it was very important in Brazil, in the Brazilian society, because this scientific racism, it was politic, it was a national politic. And the government started to bring to Brazil white people to start a process of whitewashing the population. That photo was important to because it was so rude, so direct, and that really make me feel bad about. So I started to look in a different way to the images from the Blacks in the 19th century in order to understand Brazil, in order to understand the country, and why this kind of photo, for example, was suppressed from the history in Brazil. Nobody was talking about this. Nobody was talking about what scientific racism in Brazil. Why? If we are a result of this kind of politic. So I started to study that image, and as I told you, that was a turning point because I started to, I just changed the direction of my research, and started to deal with the idea of a cure in Brazil, but using the same images. The idea was to use the same images to think about how these images were bad for Black people in Brazil, for this part of the population, and it used the same image to cure it's like to use one idea like if the image, the first image made so harm to the population, I use the same image to cure that.
Like it's like a vaccine, a little bit could cure you. The whole thing would kill you, right?
Yes, more or less like a vaccine, more or less like homeopathy.
Homeopathic kind of.
Homeopathy, yeah, this was the idea.
So in this book, there are photographs by a wide range of photographers, mostly white Europeans, who some were sponsored by the administration, and some would come for commissions. The photograph that you are discussing, I believe is, let's see if I can get to the next slide. This source, these are the three photographs you just mentioned, and they are by Augusto Stahl, who was commissioned by Luis Agassiz. I mean, basically to create these images to classify people in this pseudo-scientific process. For those of us in the United States, we might be more familiar with Agassiz because he worked at Harvard. He was very influential at Harvard, and commissioned the J.T. Zealy set of photographs of the Gullah people in South Carolina. And those images for many American artists have been used to kind of critique scientific racism and photography's role in that. So it took you, I believe, like 2 years. I mean, between the time you came across this book and the time you make these Assentimento prints in 2012, it was like a 2-year process to really do your research and just process. I mean, these are really tough images. And they just strip this woman of, I mean, she's not identified. It's so kind of sterilized in this very violent way. And so your first kind of entry into mediating these images is through the Assentimento series. And I just see such a like generative through the root system and the child being born, and the kind of reaching for the stars through the head. I mean, I feel that this is such a generative series. And then I think we're going to need to move along a little quicker, but this becomes the installation work.
Yes.
So could you describe sort of the components of this series and how the prints shifted into this installation?
Yes. As you told, I spent 2 years until I started to deal with that image because that was so, the feeling was so bad. I found information. That was not difficult to find the information about that image. The problem was with myself. The problem was with me. I spent 2 years trying to understand that and trying, to be able to be capable to deal with that image, because that is very, 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 very violent. So I made that the lithographies. And in that case, all the ideas about this population, all the negative ideas that the racists had about the population, I just turned the key, just changed the key from something.
Let's kind of flip the switch from.
Yes, it's from, yes, thank you. From that negative ideas for the idea that these people really found the country. They really made the basis for the country. But the image was so small that it was on paper. The image had really something strong inside. And I thought that the image could grow a little. Really, I would like to make it in human scale.
And these are almost larger than life. I mean, they're.
No, it's the
life-sized.
It's size the human scale. Larger than we have, of course, some part over the top of the head and above the feet, because it looks larger than human scale, but the figure, it's human. I just measured my hand with her, and it's the same size. So to grow, to make this image larger, it's like to bring this woman back to life. I think that is more or less the same idea that I had when I worked with Avós, to bring these people back. And for me, it's to ask them, okay, tell me your history. Tell me your history. Because I was interested not in the numbers. We know that about 5 million Black people arrived in Brazil, something between 5 and 8 million Black people in Brazil. But I was interested in her life. She was a human being. She had a culture. She had love. She had her language. I was not interested in the numbers. I was interested in her life. So the first thing was to make her in the human scale. And the second, for example, to give her an heart or a fetus. And in these images, I use
the fetus. Here is what you're discussing.
Yes.
At the fetus.
Yes. And the idea in this case was to think about the trauma of being kidnapped in Africa and arrive in Brazil. How a person can make herself when suffered so strong trauma like this. And in this case, the concept of suture was very important. So I cut her and make her again. So we can see here on the front, on the side, on the back. But when we look really with attention to this image, we can see that the parts of the body don't fit.
They're a little uneven.
Yes, this is, for me, this is how to represent the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
How to represent the trauma. And the installation here has other components, for example, like the arms in ceramic.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see a bunch of arms, for example. Yes.
These are carved, these are wooden sculptures of arms and hands bundled together on a pallet.
Yeah. It's ceramic, the arms are ceramic, and the wood is wood and all in a bunch. Put on a,
Ceramic and wood. Mm-hmm.
and we have the videos that is about the sea, because when when these people were put in the ship, the slavery ship, they were maintained for 1 or 2 weeks without see the sunlight. It was a way to avoid rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
because after 2 weeks, of course, nobody could really make a rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that they did not know if it was day or night.
Mm-hmm.
They did not have information for where they were going or nothing like this. The only thing that they listened was the sound of the sea.
Mm-hmm.
So the videos are a point in the sea
Mm-hmm.
from one day to another.
Just
So
24 hours of watching the sea come in and out. Mm-hmm. Or hearing, I guess, hearing this.
here, yeah, the idea was that before entering in the installation, the public listened the sound of the sea.
Mm-hmm. So to me, I mean, for the audience, I think it's important to, I mean, Rosanna has highlighted this, that so that the George Emerkoff publication, a lot of those photographs were not circulating in any real way until the mid 2000s. So these are still very, in some ways, new images to us because they had been suppressed or kind of lost in the archive, and now they're coming to us at this very fraught moment, especially in Brazil, where there's just a huge increase in anti-Black violence, with the sort of political swing right in the past few years. So these images are they're very new in many ways to some of us, because they were suppressed, and that therefore that these histories were, I mean, they're, like you said, they're sort of an amnesia about Black men and women's role in founding the country. And so you title this work Assentamento, which loosely translates to settlement, but also speaks to kind of the founding of the country, and that these women founded and built the country.
Yes.
So I know that we're running a little bit low on time. So I just wanted to maybe get to, sorry, I just might have given everybody a fit with that scrolling. I just wanted to get to this artist book that you made in 2016. Some of these images are from the same publication, but you're really expanding your source imagery here. And to me, this is a big step forward in looking at like natural history and the way that of scientific racism vis-a-vis Black women and men in Brazilian society, and like a broader conversation about colonialism and imperialism, and like a sort of manifest the progress of nations, but it being contingent on the oppression and social control of Black men and women. So I was just wondering if you could kind of talk about, we see in this page here, this is the same page, but there's sort of an action that happens with the book. And to me, you might have mentioned this, but this is such an idea about shadow citizenship. And like I said, the sort of amnesia that we have about the way our countries were founded and built, and the role of Black women both in the United States and in Brazil. So I was wondering if you could maybe just touch on this book quickly. I know we might have to get to questions soon, but to me, this is just a really amazing piece, this artist book.
Yes, the book is called Natural History, but it has a comma because the history of the science is not really something natural. It's something that is very political. So I was trying to understand that this is really about the scientific racism. I think that the ideas of scientific racism that started, for example, in settlement and in other works, really here in the book, I really developed these ideas. So, for example, in this plate, as gents, that is called the translation, something like the people, we are dealing with that myth in Brazil about the formation of the country. The country be formed by blacks and by native people and by white people, of course. But who were considered human being? Who were considered really people in the really a person in this case? Not for the blacks were not considered a person or native people, but the only that were considered like person was the one that were inside the ship, the white people. So I try to discuss how this idea about natural history and false science really helped to work the country that we are now. Because as I told, these ideas, they were used to bring white people, whitewashing the population, and it was just suppressed. The chapter of the Brazilian history was just suppressed. Nobody talks about this anymore. So it sometimes for general people sounds like natural. For example, the place occupied by blacks in the Brazilian society, but they just don't, or they don't know about this history about scientific racism, or they don't consider it. They don't consider, for example, that the black population was just put aside. They just put this population aside. They just were waiting that the population disappeared. We have some prognostics in Brazil that in 2012, Brazil will not have more blacks. And it was discussed in the Congress, for example. So this idea of racism and scientific racism was just suppressed. And it's very bad because people in general in the streets, for example, they think that it's natural.
And photography, I mean, photography from the get-go has been used as a sort of, it has this truth claim that if you have a photographic image, it is true and it can serve as evidence. And so these photographs, like the ones that you were using in the Sentimento series, they were used for evidentiary purposes. I mean, they were deployed in that way. And so, especially today when we consume so much visual imagery, I mean, I think it's, for me, your work is really putting the pins to like how we accept photography as natural and as objective, that it can be used as a way of resistance and like solid representation, and it can also be used as a tool to create these sort of false realities, which your work is very much trying to interrogate what we assume, like these sort of false or naturalized histories and realities that are being questioned. So I am seeing, there's so much more I want to talk about. There's other works that I had on, because your work is just so rich. I mean, there's so much to look at and think about all these different aspects of these issues in Brazilian society. I'm seeing some questions come in, and I believe that Max will kind of facilitate the audience Q&A.
Yes. Well, thank you both for your amazing conversation. That was really illuminating. And we have a lot of really wonderful questions from our audience in response. I'm going to start with a friend of FotoFest, Jamie Robertson, who asked, "Hi, Rosanna, can you tell us about, or can you talk about the over-sexualization of Black women in Brazil and its relationship to the violence of Brazilian society?"
Okay. We have in Brazil not only the over-sexualization of Black women, but we have as well the idea that Black women were made to perform the hardest works in society. So the idea that people outside the country have about Black females is about the sexualization. That in the country, for example, you have a division that is linked with the color of the skin. We can't forget that Brazil is a very mixed country. So darker the skin, more devaluated is the woman. So the Black woman that is darkest skin, for example, they were considered for the hardest work to work in the worst places, for example, or to perform jobs like a cleaner or like nannies, for example. But if for the females that are mixture, then they had the skin, how can I say, is clear?
Lighter skin tones.
Lighter skin, yes. The female that has the lighter skin, the lighter black skin, that is over sexualized. And this came since from the colonial time. That's something that did not just started some years ago, that comes since from the colonial period. And we can find this in the literature, for example, or in the painting or in the fine arts, when we see the idea of, I use here a word that we don't use anymore in Brazil, that is mulata. That is the female, the Black female that is lighter skin. That's like my case, for example, that is called the mulata. We don't use this word anymore in Brazil, but I'm using just to express, to explain these concepts. And these mulata were considered very sexual, very hot. But the Blacks that is darkest is for the worst jobs. In a way, for the Black females, the thing is, you are never considered really like human. You are never considered really part of the population, because you are in the worst places in the society, with the worst jobs in society, or you are just considered like a sexual element, and not to be married, for example, not to be married. So we can find the great part of the houses in Brazil, the country, that are that has a mother, only the mother, that has no father, for example, are from Black females today in the Brazilian society. So this idea that the Black females are not to be married, for example, it's something that, of course, is directly linked with these ideas that our Black females are hard job, or they are just, to be a sexual toy, maybe.
We have an interesting question from Elizabeth Strong, who writes, "Thank you for sharing your work today. Your emphasis on the assentamento to women's humanity as an individual, not as one of the 5 to 8 million kidnapped people, is impactful. I'm interested in your observation of the Black Lives Matter movement, especially after the murder of George Floyd and its influence on people of color in Brazil."
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm very interested to tell this history about the, as I told you, not about the number. I'm not interested to say, okay, 5 or 8 billion people arrived as slaves in Brazil. We know that. But for me, the thing that really caught my attention is to discuss the humanity in this population. As I told you about, for example, the Black females, we just discussed this some minutes ago, how this population was animalized. Is that correct? Animalized?
Animalized or
Yes,
dehumanized or
dehumanized. How this population was dehumanized. So in in the work assentamento, the idea was to deal with this. Okay, we are not talking about numbers. We are talking about the human beings that arrived in the country. How is to be kidnapped in our country, put in a ship, and to be sent to a country that you don't know where it is, you don't know which kind of language, you don't know even if you will survive to this crossing, to cross the sea, and arrive in another country and still build a country, still make a country. I just can't understand how these people were brave, how these people were strong. Because for me, it's something I really can't imagine how could be this crossing to cross the sea and even to make a country. So because this, I was interested in this drama, the human drama, and not the numbers, because it is very easy when we are dealing with this kind of question, just think about numbers and forget that we are talking about human being. And then the other part of the question that is interested in your observation of the Black Lives Matter, especially after the murder of George Floyd, and its influence on people of color in Brazil. Of course, a movement like Black Lives Matter is very, very, very important to call the attention, show that it's not natural. It's not natural to kill Black people. It's not natural to see violence against this population as something that just happens. That's not absolutely natural. It's a point that I deal, for example, in the book História Natural, Natural History, when I put the comma, is about this. Not coming the question tag. Is about this because it is not natural to kill a person just because the color, her color of skin or his color of skin. That's not natural. Of course, that's not natural. And it arrived in Brazil. The influence spread all around the world, not only in Brazil. It is spread all around the world. And people went to streets as well because we are having this problem of the Black genocide, the young Black that are being killed by the police in Brazil. That's an enormous number of youngers that are being killed by the policy. So of course it influenced in the fight of Brazilian people against the violence of the police. There's something that we are really, we have to organize better this kind of movement in Brazil. That's not so strong like it is, such it is, as USA, but it is a strong fight in Brazil. We are organizing better against this kind of violence in Brazil.
I think we have a question from Stephen Evans who's going to pop in here.
First, I wanted to thank you, Rosanna, and thank you, Martha Scott, for a great conversation. We've learned so much about your work, and it's been very illuminating. I wanted to ask, Rosanna, of course you grew up with the overt and the covert violence against Black people living in Brazil. but I wanted to ask you when you became aware of the kind of violence that is apparent in the scientific and anthropological images. And were you, was this part of your early education? Did you come to it more recently? I'm just very curious because I think you make such an effective use of this imagery and turning it into something, as you say, that humanizes the subject, which is very beautiful.
Thank you, Stephen. I was ever interested in biology. I thought that I would become a biologist myself. So I started to study about biology very early. That when I saw the photo in 2010, that was not the first time that I had contact with the scientific racism. I had I think that the main contact started when I was at my 20s, for example, when I was at the university. But the shock that special image caused to me, it was very strong because that turning point in my career. Of course, I knew about the scientific racism because I prepared myself to go to the university and be a biologist. I knew about this. I knew about the theories. But something is you knew about an idea, and the other you see is you see that ideas really, how can I say, translated in an image that is different. You know, the
Yes.
feelings that is different. So I knew about this. I started to discuss this and read about this subject when I was at my 20s, more or less. But when I saw that photo from August Stahl, that was so violent, and I was not prepared. I think that maybe I can explain like this. I was not prepared. I was just studying in a book about the Black population. We had terrible images, of course, there because it deals with the slavery. But when I just changed the page and saw that image, that was like, you know, to be slapped on my face because that was so violent. So I knew about this, but to see that image when you're not prepared to face it, I think because the impact was so strong, but I knew about this since my 20s.
Thank you.
And I understand that format of that Augusto Stahl photograph to have a front, side, and back view, that is maybe not the first, but certainly one of the earliest images that uses that.
Is the first.
It's the first for that composition. Yeah. And now when you think about the way that we take our, specifically like mugshots, passport, I mean, that format has totally just saturated the way that we image people in certain contexts. And so that is just to have that at the beginning, to have it be of this this woman towards, you know, a means of justifying apartheid and racial classification. I mean, it's, to me, that's all equally violent, that it's just perpetuated to
reducing people to specimens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
That pose was created in Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
in Janeiro, in 1865. I think that was maybe the pose that called my attention that way, because it's violent. And then after it was used by, it's a forensic pose, you know, that was used a lot to try to prove that some people were inferior, that are not human like others. I think that it may be the thing that really called my attention and shocked me so much was this pose. And because this, I started to study, to deep my studies about that specific group of photos, because it's front, side, and back.
We have an interesting question from another FotoFest friend who's writing all the way from Porto Alegre, Brazil, actually. This is a question from Ana Ortega. She says, "Hi, Rosanna. Thank you for being here and giving us the opportunity to hear about your wonderful work. Seeing your work, I think a lot about a Brazilian writer, Conceição Evaristo. Do you see any relation between how your and Conceição's work connects, both bringing ancestrality and the stories of Black women, you starting from an image and her starting from literature?"
Wow, I think that the link between my work and Conceição Evaristo, that is a Black Brazilian writer that created a concept of escrever in Portuguese, escrever, that means more or less writing to survive. So is this thing that you have to create if you want to survive. And so for me, this link is this. The link, if we can say that our link between my work and Conceição Evaristo's work, is that we have to deal with this. We have to talk about this. It's like something here, that I have to talk. And I think that Conceição Evaristo has the same ideas. We have to. It's the way to survive, to deal with art. For us, for me, and I believe that for Conceição as well, is a way to maintain to survive, the way to maintain yourself alive. So I think that the link is this. We have to talk about this.
Brilliant. Okay, I think that's all of the time we have today. I want to thank both of you for taking time out to speak with our audience today. And I want to thank all the audience members for your wonderful questions. I hope we got to all of them through one answer or another. Rosanna, you're so generous. And Martha Scott, you're so incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rosanna, thank you so much for sharing your work and your creative process with us. Martha Scott, thank you so much for your insights and your impeccable research into the work. I'm very impressed, and it was a really wonderful conversation. So thank you again. Really wonderful. And
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
And that wraps up today's conversation. And as I said in the introduction, the two-part introduction, in 4 weeks' time, on September 12th, I'll be in conversation with Azu Nwagbogu, the founder of Lagos Photo, curator, impresario, organizer, and I hope you'll join us for that at 2 p.m. on Saturday, September 12th.
Thank you again, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.